All right, let's take you to our weekly satirical look at events and people that made the news. Here's our very own Wilson Buru.
It is the 36th week of the year. A very good evening to you and welcome to Mock the Week, and let's get right to it. I think President Uhuru Kenyatta needs to resign. But we'll get to that in a moment. Let's first talk about other things like MCAs, which are our favorite subjects of discussion about anything. An MCA from Runyenjes by the name of Steve Simba Munene has apologized for proposing that their spouses should get loneliness allowance since they are normally very busy doing MCA work at night or something of that sort.
The devolution, Speaker, did to take off well, Mr. Speaker. They will get the spouses, Mr. Speaker. Get some allowances, Mr. Speaker. Because if I get home at 12, Mr. Speaker, you see I'm not suffering a rule, Mr. Speaker. She also suffering, Mr. Speaker, because my presence is also missed.
First of all, this fellow looks very far from being lonely. And secondly, he recanted that statement and said he was just joking around. Oh, you like jokes, huh? You're the funny guy. Yes? Okay. You're in luck because as it so happens, here on Mock the Week, we like making jokes too. Actually, the weekly brief that we get is go forth and make jokes. For instance,
Mr. Speaker, I think anyone who asks for a loneliness allowance, Mr. Speaker, is a douchebag, Mr. Speaker. And you can even call such a person an idiot, Mr. Speaker, or even a goat, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, such a person needs to realize, Mr. Speaker, that taxpayers, Mr. Speaker, do not grow money on trees, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think, Mr. Speaker, that such a person, Mr. Speaker, if they want to get such an allowance, Mr. Speaker, then probably, Mr. Speaker, that person can form a country, Mr. Speaker.
Come on, it was a joke. How do you like my joke now? And since you like jokes so much, how about you apply to be this DJ's assistant?
Anita, I mix DJ, oh yeah, mix baby, sawalele, sawale, pom pom, borogotom, akoroba, ausha, ashawa, agusha, kausha, borogotom.
And speaking of jokes, the fellows from the House of Retirees, aka the senators, do not seem to be joking around with the amount of money they want us to pay them.
Okay, we're starting now.
Okay, the Deputy Speaker, Kembi Gitura, thinks it's worth a laugh, but he believes it will make them better workers.
We need to be effective and we need to be seen on the ground. That's why we have those offices.
Yes, only paying our senators obscene amounts of money that would make our MPs look like saints would make them effective in doing their job.
They first of all need to also justify their role in the counties. In essence, their presence in the counties has not been felt.
And speaking of eating, this group of coast politicians were a very unhappy lot, and it all has to do with something for the stomach.
Lakini kwa sababu wewe wapenda biriani sana, ile yenu huithamini, umpele kwa barke ndio unkula wasema wewe atosha.
Sisi wanawake, mwanamume akikutongoza, siku ya kwanza mkenda mkila chipsi wala chipsi, wamwambia kwanza nitaka nyumba, akunulie hiyo nyumba. Wamwambia tena nunulia shamba, akununulie shamba. Vitu vingi mpaka ukiona sasa uko sawa sawa ndio weza kumpa date, ama sivyo? Lakini wewe siku ya kwanza uliponunuliwa chipsi ushagivin, ushatoa date.
And if you can't afford to do all that,
bure yenu sana nyinyi, bure kabisa nyinyi.
And speaking of the president, and before we get to why I think the president should resign, let's talk about these pictures that have been the subject of some serious discussion. First of all, let's agree on one thing. The head of state looks very good in that combat gear. He looks like he's been hitting the gym. But what most people failed to see is Jomo Geshaga right behind him carrying what looks like a nuclear football. What is a nuclear football, you ask? Very good question. A nuclear football is a bag full of launch codes for nuclear weapons that follows the US president wherever he goes. So the question is, have we already built a nuclear weapon? And it would seem that the president looked so good and or made such a powerful statement that others joined in the fun. Budalangi MP Ababu Namwamba also went combat as he supposedly mended fences with Baba. And that brings us to our big question tonight, and we are asking, now that Ababu Namwamba wore military regalia, does that make him the commander-in-chief of the ODM forces? But President Uhuru Kenyatta and Ababu Namwamba were not the only ones dressing up as a show of power. Devolution Cabinet Secretary Anne Waiguru donned my great-grandmother's attire for her homecoming ceremony. Yes, even cabinet secretaries who are not involved in politics deserve a grand homecoming. But there's apparently no money to pay teachers or health workers. Anyway, what is important is after shedding the combat fatigues, the president was back to perfecting his newfound hobby, interfering with microphones, but not before he could shake a leg.
Referendum!
Pesa mashinani au pesa sijui. Hii pesa kwani inatoka mti gani ndio munioneshe mimi hata mimi niende nikavune hiyo pesa?
Taxpayers, Mr. Speaker, do not grow money on trees, Mr. Speaker.
Yale ambayo ameleta chini hapa ni 12%, 12%.
Now let's revisit the issue of why I think President Uhuru Kenyatta should resign. Oh, what? This? Well, I am the commander-in-chief of Mock the Week, so it goes with the territory. Earlier this week, before becoming a commando, President Uhuru Kenyatta registered as a civil servant number 1. Here's a small complication. Chapter 137(2) of the Constitution states that a person is not qualified to be nominated as a presidential candidate if he or she is a public officer or is acting in any state or other public office. Which brings me back to my earlier sentiment. President Uhuru Kenyatta needs to resign.
Wonderful.
Which job he quits is entirely up to him. Wilson Buru for KTN's Mock the Week.